Hello, my name is Hallie, and welcome to this evaluation of social perception and behavior. In this review, we're going to identify how we perceive the behavior of the people that we encounter in everyday life, and what thought processes do we use to understand that behavior. We'll also identify how our own cultural backgrounds influence the way that we perceive the people around us. And by completing this review, you'll have a better ability to identify and define the theories that describe how we perceive the people around us and how we form opinions about those people. And we'll also be able to approach questions such as the one at the bottom of the screen, which presents you with the patient and asks you to identify how this patient arrived at their conclusion. Before we evaluate the theories that affect our social perception, let's first define what social perception really is. And it's also known as social cognition, and this is our ability to make impressions or opinions of the people around us. And there are three required participants for social perception. There is the perceiver, the target, and the situation, which provides social context. Let's now explore one model of social perception, which is called impression bias. And this is the way that perceivers take up behavioral and social cues from a target and use those cues to form an impression of that target. And impression bias is based on four main ideas, one being the reliance on central traits. This is simply a perceiver's innate desire to place a label or categorize a target. For example, you may describe your friends as being intelligent, trustworthy, shy, or bold. And the decision to label a target with these traits is based off of two key interactions, either the primacy effect, which is that the first impression is the most important, or the recency effect, which states that the most recent interaction with that target is the most important. For example, I have a hypothetical friend named Bob who I had met at a party, and I found him to be very obnoxious and loud and annoying, but I happened to bump into Bob at a coffee shop the other day, and I thought he was really great. We had a wonderful conversation. He's a really funny guy. I like him. That would be an example of my most recent interaction with Bob being the most important to me. And then finally, there's the implicit personality theory, which states that a perceiver will often hastily categorize a target into a certain category, and the perceiver will use this impression to predict the behavior of the target, which is often referred to as stereotyping. The halo effect also influences our perception of other people, and this is when we allow our general impression of a person to influence our perception of the specific aspects of that individual. So for example, let's say we have Judy here, and in general, we like Judy. She's a very nice woman. Well, since we have a positive impression of Judy, we are more likely to say that she's also trustworthy. She can do no wrong, or that she's a good mother, regardless of our actual experience with Judy in these specific aspects of her life. Interesting note, attractiveness also produces the halo effect. So if the perceiver finds their target to be attractive, it's more likely that the perceiver will consider that target to be trustworthy or friendly. There are two other theories that influence our bias that we will want to know for test day. One is the just world hypothesis, and this is conceptually identical to karma, that whatever energy or impression you leave on the world is the type of impression or treatment that you will receive. So good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. The caveat to the just world hypothesis is that people who strongly believe in this tend to be guilty of victim blaming. So they tend to look at a victim and say that they must have done something to deserve what happened to them. The final bias is self-serving bias, which quite simply states that we consider our successes to be based on our own hard work, and our failures are for reasons that are out of our control. For example, if I successfully drive to work through a major snowstorm, well, that's because I'm a good driver and I know what I'm doing. However, if I had driven in that same snowstorm and had gotten in a wreck, I would be claiming that that's not my fault. It was snowing. It was out of my control. The attribution theory defines our natural need to understand why people behave the way they do and what influences their behavior. And these influences fall into one of two categories, either dispositional or situational. Dispositional being the intrinsic factors of the person, this being their beliefs or their personality, while situational means they're contextual clues, external factors that would influence their behavior. So let's take an example of we made lunch plans with a friend, and at the last minute our friend canceled. Well, did our friend cancel because she's kind of flaky and she does things like this? Or was it situational? Did she get called into work last minute? Did she have an assignment due? Or maybe she has some financial constraints that we don't know about right now. And the attribution theory says that we observe cues from the people around us and try to categorize if their behavior is based off of their own disposition or was it due to this particular situation. There are three types of cues that we use to attribute a person's behavior to either dispositional or situational context. Let's still continue with our example that our friend canceled lunch with us. The first cue we can use is consistency cues. Does this person consistently behave this way? And if that's the case, where this person cancels on us all the time, then we're more likely to believe that this behavior is dispositional. However, we also have to look at the consensus. How much does this behavior deviate from the social norm? Does everyone cancel lunch plans with me? Maybe it's because it's the middle of the day and everyone has to be at work or at other places. So maybe the behavior is actually situational. Then there's distinctiveness cues, where we evaluate, does this person always cancel just lunch plans, or does this happen all the time? Maybe this person consistently cancels on me, which would be part of her disposition, or she cancels on me because there's a situation that's out of her control. One caveat to the attribution theory is the fundamental attribution error. And this is our natural tendency to blame things on a person's disposition rather than the situational context, especially when we perceive the event as having a negative effect. For example, let's say that we were given a group assignment and we delegated pieces of that assignment to different members of our team. And when we all come back into work the next day, we realize that one member of our team did not complete their portion of the assignment. And we instantly are inclined to believe that that team member is either lazy or didn't care about the project, and we ignore any possibility that it might have been situational. The fundamental attribution error feeds into our self-serving bias, which we defined just a few moments ago, where we feel like we weren't able to accomplish something because of something outside of our control, like our team members' lack of effort. A person's culture also plays a huge factor on how they perceive other people, and cultures will generally fall into one of two categories. One being individualist cultures. These will place an emphasis on independence and seeking personal goals, but people from these types of cultures tend to make fundamental attribution errors and are more likely to attribute a person's behavior to dispositional factors, while people from collectivist cultures, which place an emphasis on conformity and family and interdependence, are more likely to attribute a person's behavior to situational factors. Let's try some practice questions, such as this one, which asks us to determine how this patient that's been newly diagnosed with type 2 diabetes arrived to their conclusion. And the correct answer is self-serving bias. This patient instantly started blaming external factors that are outside of their control instead of evaluating their own diet and habits as potentially being the cause of their type 2 diabetes. We can also evaluate the situation and identify the cue that allowed this receptionist to arrive at her perception of this patient. And the correct answer is C, consistency cue. The more consistent the behavior, the more likely we are to associate this as being part of this person's disposition. We can also predict a person's behavior based off of their cultural background. And the correct answer is D. Individualist cultures place an emphasis on independence, and moving away from home would certainly be a characteristic of independence. So to highlight the key takeaways that we want to remember for test day is that our social perception is influenced by several different biases and hypotheses that influence our understanding of other people's behavior, while attribution theory is our innate need to understand if a person's behavior is influenced by the person's disposition versus the situation. And cultural attribution theory states that our perception of other people is influenced by the culture that we are from. Well, congratulations on completing this review. These topics are not only relevant to the behavioral sciences portion of your MCAT, but they'll also give you a better understanding of how your future patients will perceive you and what behaviors will influence their opinions. Thank you for joining me, and as always, best of luck on your MCAT.